The medieval period, spanning roughly from the 5th to the late 15th century, was marked by brutal social hierarchies and rigid control over the lives of the populace. The justice system during this time was oppressive, unforgiving, and often excessively cruel. One of the most extreme punishments administered to young boys, whether for minor offenses, rebellion, or perceived threats to political or religious power, was castration. The crimes that led to such a harsh punishment were often relatively minor by today's standards. Theft, petty rebellion, or dissent were common reasons boys found themselves facing such a fate. Yet in the eyes of medieval rulers and religious authorities, even the smallest act of disobedience could be perceived as a direct challenge to their authority. In an era where social order was rigidly enforced by both the church and the state, any act of rebellion, whether by an adult or a child, was seen as a threat to the existing power structure. The punishment for these offenses was never just about the crime itself. It was about sending a message to everyone else. The young boys accused of wrongdoing were usually brought before a bishop or a court, figures who held complete dominion over their lives. These authorities would declare that the punishment would be castration, a brutal way to ensure that the boys would no longer pose any threat, politically or socially. This was not just a form of punishment, but an act of control, designed to ensure that any potential for rebellion or defiance was thoroughly crushed. The boys, stripped of their dignity and rights, were then taken to the site where the procedure would be carried out. The place was often a cold, sterile room, lit by dim, flickering candles. The operation was performed by individuals who were neither trained surgeons nor compassionate healers, but rather unskilled doctors, often barbers or imams, who were tasked with carrying out the procedure with little regard for the agony or long-term consequences. The process was crude and unregulated. There was no anesthesia, no sanitation, no protection for the boy except for the indifferent hands of the person performing the operation. In many cases, the operation would result in infection, blood loss, and death. For the boy being castrated, it wasn't just a matter of losing his reproductive organs. It was a psychological trauma of unparalleled magnitude. His very identity as a male, his future as a potential leader, or even his hopes for family and children were destroyed in that moment. His body, once a symbol of potential, became a vessel of suffering and helplessness. The boys who survived castration faced lives marked by enduring physical and psychological pain. The scars left by the procedure would be visible reminders of their humiliation, their impotence. But beyond the physical effects, the psychological consequences were profound. Emotionally, the boys were left to navigate a world where their masculinity had been erased. They were now seen as less than men, perhaps even less than human. The society that once may have viewed them with some degree of expectation now regarded them as objects of pity or contempt. They were removed from the social order, seen as broken and incapable of fulfilling their roles within the family, the community, or even the state. Their families often abandoned them, unwilling or unable to cope with the disgrace of having a son who had been so thoroughly emasculated. Some boys were forced into lives of servitude or forced labor, while others might seek refuge in the church, where their suffering could be interpreted as a form of penance or divine punishment. For those who had been castrated for political reasons, such as heirs to thrones or noble families, the outcome was even more profound. These boys, once seen as potential threats to the established power, were now incapable of ever rising against their oppressors. They had been turned into symbols of complete submission. Castration as a punishment was not just about the individual, it was about power. The ruling elite used this punishment as a tool to prevent potential threats from ever reaching maturity. A young boy with ambition, potential, or political value could be castrated by a noble family in order to preserve their own position of power. In some cases, even within royal families, Boys would be castrated to eliminate rivals, particularly those who were seen as potential claimants to the throne. For those in the church, castration could be seen as a form of spiritual purification or divine retribution, a means of ridding a person of sin and making them subservient to the higher authority. This use of violence as a means of control allowed the ruling classes to maintain their stranglehold on power. It served to suppress any rebellion, any form of dissent. The power of the church and state depended on the fear they instilled in their subjects.